All right.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam Prabhu, we are live.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada. All glories to our revered speaker for today, His Grace VENKATA BHATTA PRABHU, whom we're going to attempt to introduce formally, probably at the end of the class, by which time we believe many more devotees would have been here. But today we are very much blessed. We have a double dose of nectar. Of course, one of the nectar may not be so palatable, but it's still a nectar anyway. Prabhuji is here, is going to be speaking from the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, and also share with us about the transcendental disappearance of Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada. So we encourage devotees to be very attentive, so that at the end of the discussion, we may all be nourished by this wonderful Sangha. So, VENKATA Prabhu, thank you so much for being here as always. And without further ado, we may put the verse on the screen, and then you take it over from here.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much. Sahadev Prabhu, am I audible?
Very audible, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. So let's do this. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So, Prabhu, am I correct in understanding that we've already had Jai Radha Madhav prayers?
Yes, sure, Prabhupada.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. So then we can just dive right into the recitation of the verse. After that, I'll chant a brief Mangalacharana invocation prayers, and then we can have some reflections and I hope some discussion.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just trying to, would it be possible to spotlight my screen and to make the view full screen?
Yes, let me do that.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. We are reading today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 4th chapter. Today's text is shlok number 12. Oh, I think I just lost the...
No, I'm going to do it. So.
Okay.
Okay, I see where. All right, Hare Krishna. Yeah, you may go ahead, Prabhuji.
Okay.
Are you able to see the screen?
I am now, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. So again, this is Canto 3, Chapter 4, Text 12. Sa esha sadho charamo bhavanam asaditaste mad anugraho yat yanmam nilokan raha utsrijantam dishtya dadrishvan vishadanu vritya. Translation. O honest one, your present life is the last and the supermost, because in this term of life you have been awarded my ultimate favor. Now you can go to my transcendental abode, Vaikuntha, by leaving this universe of conditioned living entities. Your visit to me in this lonely place, because of your pure and unflinching devotional service, is a great boon for you. Srila Prabhupada's purport. When a person is fully conversant with knowledge of the Lord as far as can be known by a perfect living entity in the liberated state, he is allowed to enter into the spiritual sky, where the Vaikuntha planets exist. The Lord was sitting in a lonely place, just about to disappear from the vision of the inhabitants of the universe. And Uddhava was fortunate to see him even at that time, and thus receive the Lord's permission to enter Vaikuntha. The Lord is everywhere at all times, and his appearance and disappearance are merely the experience of the inhabitants of a particular universe. He is just like the sun. The sun does not appear or disappear in the sky. It is only in the experience of men that in the morning the sun rises and in the evening the sun sets. The Lord is simultaneously both in Vaikuntha and everywhere within and without Vaikuntha. So the verse again, O honest one, your present life is the last and the supermost, because in this term of life you have been awarded my ultimate favor. Now you can go to my transcendental abode, Vaikuntha, by leaving this universe of conditioned living entities. Your visit to me in this lonely place, because of your pure and unflinching devotional service, is a great boon for you. Om Gyantimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Shvayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Hare Krishna. So, by Krishna's divine arrangement, it happens to be that this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think, is so appropriate for a day like today, which, as Sahadev Prabhu indicated, is a bit of a bittersweet celebration for us. It is the disappearance day of His Divine Grace, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to draw from this verse and Srila Prabhupada's short but very powerful purport to reflect on this day and its significance for us. Some might ask why we mark a day like this and why we would even use a word like celebrate. It seems maybe a little bit strange to use a word like celebrate, which we generally associate with very happy, very joyous occasions, in association with the passing, or we can say more accurately, as we'll discuss, the disappearance of a great Vaishnav. And so today I'd like to just reflect on this. And as I was thinking about what I'd like to share, I thought this purport really brings out, in a very beautiful way, three angles of vision by which we can maybe better understand why we celebrate the disappearance day of a great Vaishnav. Although generally in our tradition, we don't celebrate in the same way or mark the disappearance of Sri Krishna himself. But when it comes to great devotees of Krishna, and particularly the acharyas, the gurus in our line, the teachers, we're especially encouraged to see them as opportunities to celebrate their disappearance day as well as their appearance days. So I wanted to reflect on that. But before I do, I also wanted to offer one more invocation prayer. This is a beautiful prayer that was written by Raghunath Das Goswami in, I believe, a text called Mukta Charitra. And in this beautiful prayer that I'll recite now, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, he is expressing his gratitude to his gurus. The prayer goes like this. Namashrestam manamapi sachiputram ataraswarupam rupam tasya graja urupurim mathurim goshtavatim Radha kundam girivaram aho radhika madhavasam prapto yasya pratita kripaya Shri Guru tam natosmi. In this prayer, Raghunath Goswami, he's just reflecting on all of these gifts that he has experienced. And he goes wonderfully, one by one, he talks about the gift of the holy name, the powerful holy name, the gift of being introduced to the son of Sachi Devi, the golden volcano of love, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya, being introduced to the confidential associates of Lord Chaitanya like Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami. He says he's been introduced to, or he's been given a glimpse into, he's been invited into the holy places of Mathura and Vrindavan. He says, oh, the wonderful Govardhan Hill and Radhakund, very significant for us as we're just we've just experienced Govardhan Puja and the appearance of Radhakund during this month of Kartik. So he singles out Radhakund and Govardhan. He says, these amazing treasures of Radhakund and Govardhan, I've been allowed some entrance into them. And he says, I've been given the hope that one day I may personally serve Sri Sri Radha and Madhava in their intimate pastimes in the most sacred of sacred places in Braj. How in the world have I been so fortunate to receive these gifts? And he concludes that it is only by the grace and with the assurances of my gurus that I've been given these gifts. And I wanted to start there because one of the things that we can reflect on at any time, but especially on a day that commemorates the disappearance day of our gurus, our param gurus, our acharyas, is gratitude. We can be in a space of gratitude, even as it's natural, even as we may feel sadness, even as we may feel separation and longing, even as there may be some lamentation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Those emotions are also natural. Those emotions are actually also devotional. And there's some wonderful purports in, I believe it's the fourth canto of the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, where Srila Prabhupada specifically references that no, Vaishnavas should actually have these emotions, particularly around the passing of the spiritual master. So we don't want to deny those emotions, those feelings, or we don't want to be dismissive of them or say, no, Vaishnavas shouldn't feel any kind of sadness or anything like that. And at the same time, that sadness, that lamentation, that pain of separation is also mixed with the very uplifting feeling of gratitude that we see these days as an opportunity to reflect on how fortunate we are to have been given this gift, whether we had the personal association of a great soul like Srila Prabhupada, or whether that those gifts came through his Vani, through his instruction, and through the many devotees that he inspired and that he instructed. So we can connect to Srila Prabhupada in all these different ways. The first angle of vision that this purport offers us is, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the purport again. Srila Prabhupada begins by saying, when a person is fully conversant with knowledge of the Lord as far as can be known by a perfect living entity in the liberated state, he is allowed to enter into the spiritual sky where the Vaikuntha planets exist. In other words, when one has perfected one's life, the Lord calls such a soul home. Our journey has reached its conclusion. To offer a very simple analogy, it's a little simple, or we can say it's a little crude, but just as we may enroll in a college or university, I work in a university, so just as we may enroll in a college or university for some time, we're there for a duration of time, but the perfection of our time at that university is actually found when it's found on the day that we graduate. And that day that we graduate, that's actually called, at least here in the US and maybe in other places in the world, it's called commencement day. So it's a very like strange kind of thing seen from in a certain way, that the day you graduate is called commencement. Commencement means you commence, you start something. But the understanding is now your training is over, and this day marks when you are ready to enter into and commence what you've been preparing for. And so in a similar way, we can look at our sojourn, our journey through the material world, through not just as in colleges or universities. Many students go for maybe 4 years, 5 years, something like that. But for us, how many, not just years, but lifetimes have we been studying in this college of the material world? Sometimes passing the exam, sometimes falling behind, sometimes having to repeat the class. And Lord Krishna, far more than any teacher, any educator in this material world, Sri Krishna and his associates and the acharyas, they're so kind, they're so merciful. They just give us chance after chance after chance to get it right. And when we actually reach that point where we've learned the lessons we need to learn, it's time to graduate. And that graduation comes in a certain way through leaving this mortal world, but returning back home, back to Godhead. So that is our commencement. And here in this verse and in just the beginning of the purport, there's this indication that this is the perfection. This is what we're aiming towards. Now, in the case of souls like Srila Prabhupada, these great souls who are, in one sense, associates of Krishna himself, who come here for particular missions and particular objectives to serve the Lord. It may not be exactly like that for them, but at least in their presenting themselves as sadhakas and presenting themselves as models for us, they're also teaching us, they're modeling, they're giving themselves as an example. One of the meanings of the word acharya is he or she that teaches by example. So by their example, they're teaching us that this is what it's meant to be, that we are meant to reach that point where we can actually graduate from this material world. And just as Uddhava, in the verse that we read today, he is modeling for us for all time in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam, that perfect departure. Srila Prabhupada also modeled that, not only for his personal direct disciples, but for all of us. We can all access that lesson. I want to read a little bit. There's a beautiful book. There's so many books and memories that have been written, but one that I just recently rediscovered after many years. I read this book, small book, many years ago. I'm going to hold it up. I don't know if it's going to be visible, but it's called He Lives Forever. And it's a book by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami Maharaj. Satsvarup Maharaj wrote this book in 1979. So I believe it may be, if not the first, one of the first kind of reflections on Srila Prabhupada's passing, Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. It's short, but it's very, very powerful. And especially if you think about in 1979, Srila Prabhupada left us in 1977. And so it's, 2 years or maybe even less than 2 years since Srila Prabhupada left in November of 1977. So very fresh experience for all the disciples and devotees at that time. And so Satsvarup Maharaj just really beautifully reflects on these different ways that we can meditate on and we can process Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. I want to read a little bit from here, specifically on this lesson of how Srila Prabhupada modeled and what his departure was. First, I want to read from this book. There's the foreword is written by a devotee who has since also left us, Brahmananda Prabhu. And Brahmananda Prabhu, I think it's especially appropriate since this is the ISKCON Africa Bhagavatam Sangha. Brahmananda Prabhu plays a very historic role in the coming of the Krishna consciousness movement to Africa. So Brahmananda Prabhu writes, I'm just going to read this briefly. He writes, I think every ISKCON devotee will always remember where he or she was and what they were doing at the precise moment they learned of Srila Prabhupada's departure. At our Nairobi temple, we were just about to begin Mangal Arti when a call came from faraway Los Angeles from Rameshwar Maharaj. It was probably as difficult for him to tell me the news as it was for me to accept it. I had always thought that Srila Prabhupada would never die. Of course, Srila Prabhupada had been very ill for many months, but just as an ordinary person blinded by material affection thinks that he won't die, so also out of attachment for Srila Prabhupada, I was imagining that he would never leave us and that he would get his health back soon and that everything would then go on forever without any disturbance. Of course, that's a sentiment, that's the mood of a loving disciple, right? We don't want to even contemplate the departure of the spiritual master. And at the same time, as some of us have experienced directly, and as in one sense all of us will have to experience one day or the other, it's a reality that we will have to experience this, but that in that disappearance there are lessons to be learned. So again, reading from this same book, Satsvarup Maharaj writes really beautifully about Srila Prabhupada's, this aspect of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, and then we'll look at a couple of other aspects. But in this aspect, Srila Prabhupada was really modeling for all devotees how one departs from this world. Just as Srila Prabhupada would instruct his disciples and through his writings and through his instructions and through his example, his pastimes, modeling for all devotees to come in the Hare Krishna movement, setting that standard for how to live in Krishna consciousness. So also Srila Prabhupada actually modeled personally. He didn't have to. It was a very private, intimate thing. But still, he made himself so accessible to his disciples to teach them what it means to leave this world, how one can leave this world in perfect Krishna consciousness. Satsvarup Maharaj writes, during his last days, Prabhupada was surrounding himself with the holy name. His whole life had been dedicated to spreading the holy name to every town and village. For his passing away, he especially wanted to fill his room with devotees chanting Hare Krishna, and Krishna fulfilled that wish. Srila Prabhupada left his body in the most sacred place on earth, Vrindavan, surrounded by Vaishnavas. We are neophyte devotees. This is Satsvarup writing about himself and his godbrothers and godsisters. We are neophyte devotees just recently picked up from the Malecha class. But anyone who chants Hare Krishna, even if he is born in a dog-eater family, has to be considered an exalted devotee who is qualified to perform Vedic yajna. Srila Prabhupada was surrounded by kirtan performed by the Vaishnavas that he had created. who were qualified only by following his orders. And that kirtan was actually Krishna. Right? So powerful. Srila Prabhupada modeled, right? He walked his talk. Srila Prabhupada didn't just flatter his disciples and say, "Oh no, you're all Vaishnavas, you're all Vaishnavas," but then in that critical moment, turn to some other resources. He had such faith in the power of the holy name that he would have his disciples chanting, and Srila Prabhupada would himself appreciate their chanting as pure chanting of the holy name, that he wanted to leave this world in that kirtan. He wanted to leave this world hearing the holy name as spoken by the lips of these devotees that were practicing for, at most, just a little more than a decade. So what an amazing lesson there, and what an amazing lesson to just be surrounded by the holy name in that way. Satsur Maharaj continues. He says, Srila Prabhupada taught us how it is possible to go step by step to death in Krishna consciousness. In one of his last days, he told one of our god brothers, "Don't think that this isn't going to happen to you." Because one may tend to think, yes, Prabhupada has departed, but we are still here. We will carry on in our youthful way after his departure. But the same thing is going to happen to us. Actually, practically, we've seen now with time, so many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples are leaving us. Particularly even recently, of course, we have the glorious example also, and I keep thinking, especially given the Sangha of devotees from Africa, thinking of another stalwart pioneer of sharing bhakti in Africa, His Holiness Srila Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj. Thinking of his departure, many of us got to witness that same lesson, right? So now we're seeing practically what Srila Prabhupada taught in 1977 is now being gloriously repeated and taught for newer and newer generations of devotees. Acharya, Satsur Maharaj continues, Acharya means one who teaches by example, and this last lesson that Srila Prabhupada gave us was one of his most wonderful and most important. He taught by his life and in his books. Whatever Srila Prabhupada did was instructive. The way he ate, the way he walked, the way he dressed, the way he lay down, the way he breathed, the way he moved. Everything a great soul does should be carefully studied. Not imitated, but understood and followed. It is meant to be followed. And so in this respect, we can compare Bhishma's passing away to Prabhupada's. Bhishma was a great soul, and the particular details of his passing away are instructive for everyone. This is real education, learning how to die. So it's powerful, it's heavy. It's heavy. And sometimes we even naturally out of our love for our spiritual masters, for our Param Guru, for the Acharyas, we don't even like to use words like die or death. And that's also appropriate, right? Because just as the Vaishnavas don't exactly eat, they honor prasadam, even in the simple act of what a materialist or what a common person might just see in secular terms as just eating. Because it's connected to Krishna. For the devotee, it's something transcendental, it's something spiritual. So we honor prasadam. So in the same way, the devotees don't leave, whatever the circumstances of their death, of their apparent dying, they don't leave like ordinary people, because their lives are spiritualized. Therefore, their departure is also spiritualized. But on the other hand, it's important for us to not spiritually bypass, as it's sometimes said. We shouldn't spiritually bypass that. Yes, we all will have to die as embodied beings. And the great souls are also teaching us this lesson of how we don't try to deny that fact or hide from that fact, but rather we can learn to embrace death as that final examination, that final passing away, that graduation ceremony or commencement ceremony. And in that respect, it can be glorious. So just as it was glorious for Uddhava, and Srila Prabhupada writes in this purport that Uddhava showed what it means for a perfect living entity to be given permission, to be granted entrance to Vaikuntha. So similarly, we can reflect on Srila Prabhupada as that, for us, probably the most vivid, most perfect example, along with his disciples, of course, but especially for us, for Srila Prabhupada, setting that example, that perfect example of glorious passing. And before I move on to the next 2 points that I'll just touch on a little bit more quickly, I just want to say, I want to address a common doubt that's sometimes raised, that with Srila Prabhupada's passing, we saw that he could be in Vrindavan, that he was surrounded by kirtan. But we've also now seen, with the passing of time and by the inconceivable will of Krishna, that other devotees don't leave under those circumstances. Some devotees leave outside of the Dham. Some devotees leave, in the West. Some devotees leave not through prolonged illness, where there's some warning or there's some notice given, where their disciples, their loved ones can come and surround them, but they may leave, apparently unexpectedly in like a car accident or something like this. And it can raise some doubts. But we should also rest assured that what makes the passing of the Acharya glorious is not only, of course, it is glorious that in the case of Srila Prabhupada, that he could be in Vrindavan, that he could be surrounded by kirtan in this way, that there's some auspicious days during Kartik and so on and so forth. That is part of what makes it glorious. But that is actually only, as the expression goes, the tip of the iceberg. That is only the most, in one sense, you can say, external aspect of what makes it glorious. What really makes it glorious on a deeper level is that consciousness. And this is an opportunity for us to trust and have faith in that deep level of Krishna consciousness that our gurus and our worshipable Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, whether they're Diksha gurus, Shiksha gurus, whether they're whatever role they may play, but we have to have faith that they're in that mode, they're living their lives to the best of their ability in that Krishna consciousness. And so also at the time of their passing, it's not an ordinary thing that can be materially calculated, but that consciousness runs so deep that at that time of death, at that time of their leaving this world, leaving this body, that consciousness carries them. It's said in Braj that Krishna, he's not so concerned. One very senior Brijbasi, he once told me that their understanding is that, what Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that one who remembers me at the time of death comes to my abode. He said that's for everyone. But for the intimate devotees of Krishna, what supersedes that instruction is that Krishna says, I will remember my devotees at the time of death. And so whatever the circumstances, we have to rest assured that it's a two-way street, that not only is the devotee's consciousness and remembrance of Krishna, but Krishna is actually inconceivably remembering each and every one of his devotees. What to speak of such a beloved devotee as Srila Prabhupada, or so many wonderful Vaishnavas. So that's the first, we can say the first aspect or the first level of appreciation of why we celebrate. Why do we celebrate the passing, the departure, the disappearance of our acharyas like Srila Prabhupada? On one level, we celebrate because it's something to be celebrated, that they have modeled for us how to perfect life and then graduate to returning home to the spiritual world, where the real fun begins, the real lila. They get to return to the eternal association and pastimes with the Lord. Srila Prabhupada would sometimes say, especially towards the end of his we can say his time with us, his earthly leelas with us, Srila Prabhupada would say, I just want to go back and play with Krishna and the cowherd boys again. Such a sweet way of looking at it. So on that first level, it's a celebration, just as we celebrate graduation and commencement in this world. We understand that while it is deeply painful for us to experience that departure, for those left behind here in separation, we also celebrate the modeling of this commencement, this graduation, this perfected life. A second and related aspect of the disappearance that we celebrate, and a second reason that we celebrate on this day, is that this departure also illustrates for us the intimate relationship that the great souls and Krishna have. That, as we read in this purport, Uddhava received the Lord's permission to enter Vaikuntha. Uddhava was fortunate to see him even at that time and received the Lord's permission to enter Vaikuntha. And I was just thinking, this is so appropriate because Srila Prabhupada, in a very similar way, also illustrated that he was receiving the Lord's permission, the Lord's blessings, that he was under the control of Krishna's will. Actually, Srila Prabhupada illustrated for us so beautifully, and we can try to walk in his footsteps. We can't artificially imitate, but we can try to walk in his footsteps. How Srila Prabhupada illustrated for us that how to live our lives surrendered to Krishna's will, right? Like the beautiful prayer that Lord Jesus Christ offers, that the Christian tradition really holds as aspiration, right? Let thy will, speaking to God, let thy will, not mine, be done, right? This was so much the mood of Srila Prabhupada, that whatever Krishna desires me to have a palace, and then for the sake of glorifying Krishna, let there be a palace. So Krishna desires me to sleep under a tree, then I'm perfectly surrendered, perfectly content with that. What it means to be content in the will of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada illustrated that time and time again. When Prabhupada said, when Krishna took everything away from me, that was Krishna's will, I was happy. When Krishna gave me everything, that was Krishna's will, I was happy. He wasn't attached to it for his own personal, just like we can speak this way, but generally our tendency is we become very attached to our particular vision, our particular plan. Even in Krishna consciousness, even in bhakti, we can say, well, wouldn't it, I have this amazing, idea of how I want to serve, how I want to share Krishna consciousness, how I want to serve Krishna. But to be so surrendered to the will of Krishna that however Krishna wants me to serve, if Krishna wants me to stay in this present position and serve, so be it. If it's Krishna's plan for me to leave, that's also in the service of Krishna. Then Krishna just wants me to serve elsewhere or in another way. And so Srila Prabhupada really beautifully illustrated this as well. Again, I want to read a little bit from these realizations that Satsrup Maharaj shared in 1979. There's something very powerful about these realizations, especially in those tender early years following Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. He writes, when I first met His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he was living in a helpless, humble, but totally dedicated way, and he allowed us to associate intimately with him. We lived with him. We served him. We even nursed him, and by that association, we became Krishna conscious. Now suddenly he was gone. Such a great personality, such a truly great personality. So it is a great fortune that we can now turn to understanding the passing of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada illustrated again and again that his death, or we can say his disappearance, was not was not ordinary. It wasn't. He wasn't forced to leave. He was so in tune with Krishna's will, with Krishna's desire, that in that alignment with Krishna's desire, he was fully surrendered to what Krishna wanted for him at that moment. I'm trying to find, and unfortunately I lost the page, but I'm trying to find there. It's another really beautiful passage where Satsuru Maharaj reflects on that for Srila Prabhupada, he was constantly asking Krishna for permission, how to act, where to go, and that Krishna decided. In fact, some of Srila Prabhupada's servants at that time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Bhakti Charu Maharaj, they wrote in their own diaries, their own memories, that Srila Prabhupada would actually even speak, even in his last days, he would speak in this way. He would say, I'm just trying to understand, does Krishna want me to stay or does he want me to go? And the disciples in their love, they were asking Srila Prabhupada, please pray to Krishna that if it's his will to allow you to stay. And Srila Prabhupada was so resigned. He was so, I don't want to say casual, but he was so undisturbed that he just very kind of, in a very calm, dispassionate, detached way, just said, all right, if this is what you all decide, then I'll pray to Krishna. And so he prayed to Krishna in that way, and he lived on for a few more months after that. But then when it became clear that it was Krishna's will, Srila Prabhupada was 100% surrendered to that will. So much so that even when some of Srila Prabhupada's disciples expressed their own unwillingness to go on without him, that we're not ready, that your movement still needs you, Srila Prabhupada very lovingly told them that that they were capable. They're so young in Krishna consciousness, but still Srila Prabhupada encouraged them, right? This movement will go on. I have faith that this movement will go on. And so in that spirit, Srila Prabhupada demonstrated so beautifully this sort of second angle of vision, that Krishna is giving him permission, and so he is surrendered. It gives such a glimpse into the relationship that Krishna has with his pure devotees. They're so aligned in terms of that contentment in Krishna's will. On the third thing that I wanted to reflect on, and then maybe open it up for some questions, comments, or reflections, is on this third level, we can celebrate Srila Prabhupada's disappearance as a celebration that Srila Prabhupada is still with us. That the disappearance of the Acharya, just as their appearance in this world is, and there's a beautiful poetic metaphor that's used for this, but that it is simply appearance and disappearance to our eyes, to our vision, just as the sun is ever existing, but its apparent rising and setting is just for our vision. Srila Prabhupada writes in this purport in relation to the Lord's appearance and disappearance. Srila Prabhupada writes, the Lord is everywhere at all times, and his appearance and disappearance are merely the experience of the inhabitants of a particular universe. He is just like the sun. The sun does not appear or disappear in the sky. It is only in the experience of men, or we can say of people, that in the morning the sun rises and in the evening the sun sets. And we can extend this idea to the Acharyas. Again, I want to read from Satsuru Maharaj's writing, where he makes the same point. He writes, Srila Prabhupada in his purport describes seeing Krishna as not mechanical. Krishna appears by his own sweet will, and he also leaves out of his own causeless mercy. Just like the sun, he is not subject to our demands. Now, only a short time after the disappearance of our beloved spiritual master Srila Prabhupada, we are seeing so many things in this light of separation. And we can understand both separation from Krishna and separation from the spiritual master in the same way. Of course, the spiritual master is not Krishna, but Sakshat Dharitvena Samashta Shastre. Because he is the direct manifestation of Krishna, his coming and going are just as spiritual as Krishna's coming and going. Krishna tells Narada, I have left you just to increase your attachment to me. This is from the first canto, the 6th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Narad Muni speaks about his feelings of separation when the vision of Krishna or Vishnu leaves, and Narad is bereft of that association. So Krishna tells Narada, I have left you just to increase your attachment to me. Satsuru Maharaj writes, and the same thing applies to the spiritual master. It should not be that after the spiritual master disappears, the disciples' attachment for him gradually wanes, that the devotees are sustained when the spiritual master is present, but in his absence, their memory of him deteriorates. And I don't think that if you do not have personal association with Srila Prabhupada, you did not know him. Even if that is a fact, the opportunity to approach him continues. So the idea is that the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada, as much as it's natural to feel that those pangs of separation, that Srila Prabhupada, that we are called to more deeply connect with Srila Prabhupada, to, as Krishna tells Narada, to increase our attachment. Paradoxically, in that separation, there's greater opportunity for union. This is actually the deepest teaching of our philosophy in our particular tradition. The gopis model this. Of course, it's a different mood, but the lesson is still the same. The gopis of Vrindavan, they model this for us. They illustrate this for us. They teach us the highest love is that love. The highest union is that union that is found in separation. And so in the same way, or in a similar way, the greatest experience of attachment to the instruction of the spiritual master may actually come through the disappearance of the spiritual master. Satsuru Maharaj continues, he writes, and he quotes Srila Prabhupada, he writes, in his concluding words of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada writes, I still consider his divine grace, meaning Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, to be always present with me by his Vani, his words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not. In other words, physical presence may or may not be there, but Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. And at the end of the passage, Srila Prabhupada writes, I think, therefore, that his divine grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is always seeing my activities and guiding me within my heart by his words. And so that is in one sense, the deepest lesson, the deepest reason to celebrate Srila Prabhupada's disappearance is by celebrating this disappearance, we can, with more intention and with more enthusiasm, we can commit to that attachment to his instructions. We can commit to that deeper level of relationship with him, right? I think it's also significant that for most of us following the sort of Western calendar, that Srila Prabhupada's disappearance day comes in November. That is towards the end of the calendar year. And it comes in Kartik. That is also a time of reflection, because these times of reflection also ask us to take stock. That, okay, it's been a full year, or it's been, now in the time of Kartik, we're taking stock, we're taking inventory, we're reflecting on our spiritual lives. We can also make this part of our reflection, especially on this day of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, Tirubhava Mahotsav, that where am I at in my relationship with Srila Prabhupada, whether we are disciples of one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples or grand disciples whether we're disciples of the disciples, as even the future generations continue, we all have a relationship with Srila Prabhupada that's very special. We can reflect as the founder Acharya of ISKCON, we can reflect on, what is my dynamic living relationship with Srila Prabhupada? What is my attachment to Srila Prabhupada's instructions, Srila Prabhupada's mood, Srila Prabhupada's mission? What is my attachment to and my connection to Srila Prabhupada's beloved devotees, disciples, and grand disciples? So it's an opportunity for us. We celebrate Srila Prabhupada's passing. We celebrate Srila Prabhupada's appearance. We celebrate his disappearance. We also celebrate our individual, dynamic, personal relationship. And we ask ourselves, we can take the opportunity to ask ourselves, what am I doing to deepen that attachment to Srila Prabhupada and to my relationship with Srila Prabhupada? So that is on that third level, where we can understand Srila Prabhupada's disappearance day is like the glorious sun setting. It's not that the sun ceases to exist, but that by Krishna's inconceivably bittersweet will, we can say, because there is a little bit of that pain is there as well. Srila Prabhupada has, in this physical manifestation, is no longer with us collectively, and especially for his disciples. It's direct disciples. It's perhaps we can't fully understand that experience, but we have to keep that faith simultaneously, that we have access to this amazing relationship with Srila Prabhupada through his Vani and through the ways that he shows up in our lives, in so many ways, through other devotees, through the legacy of instructions that he leaves behind, through his movement. The last thing I just want to share, and then I would love to open it up to questions and reflections if we have the time. But I just want to share in this vein that again, it is natural to feel emotions. Satsur Maharaj writes, he quotes from the purport of that Srila Prabhupada gives when he's discussing the passing of the spiritual master, the disappearance of the spiritual master. And he says, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, figuratively, the queen is supposed to be the disciple of the king. Thus, when the mortal body of the spiritual master expires, his disciples should cry, exactly as the queen cries when the king leaves his body. Satsur Maharaj goes on, this is not a mundane sentiment. Srila Prabhupada has told us everything we must do. And so here is another instruction. When the spiritual master leaves, you should cry. So on the one hand, everything is all right, yet on the other hand, the direction is to cry. Both sides should be there. We shouldn't feel completely undisturbed. Oh, there's no change. Everything's all right. We'll just push on the movement. It doesn't matter. There's Srila Prabhupada's Vani. No, both things should be there, at least in the period after, or we can say for us, at least on this day of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, if we're feeling that emotion, that sentiment, it's real. It's not just some, art, some sentimentality that we should just try to skip over and say, no, we should just be happy because Srila Prabhupada is still with us in his Vani. If we're feeling those emotions, we're feeling that sadness, if we even become a little bit emotional, that's also very good for our bhakti. That side is there that keeps us connected also. So simultaneously, if we can hold that tension, that dynamic tension between, on the one hand, feeling those emotions of sadness, of separation, of longing, and then also feeling that Srila Prabhupada, as Satsur Maharaj even entitles this book, he lives forever in his instruction, right? Both need to be there. Both sides need to be there. Perhaps I can just close on the actual, it's maybe a little bit, I'm turning now to a book called TKG's Diary. Perhaps it's a little heavy to hear, but I think in the spirit of this day, it's so important that we allow ourselves to feel all of the feelings. And so this is, Tamal Krishna Maharaj is very vivid. He wrote this diary entry and then, very compassionately and kindly shared it with the world through publishing this book. So this is the closest thing we have to the eyewitness account. Of course, we have the recording as well, but this is in Tamal Krishna Maharaj's own words. The Kaviraj said Prabhupada had only 2 or 3 hours left. Already we had informed ISKCON around the world. Pujaris brought tulsi flower garlands from Krishna Balaram and placed them on the pillow around Prabhupada's head. Understanding that the end was near, we chanted and prayed, there being nothing else to do. When the last attack came, they talk about these attacks of, this is not attack externally, but this is physically, Srila Prabhupada would have these sort of spasmic attacks, where it was harder and harder for him to breathe. When the last attack came at 3 p.m., Prabhupada rubbed his hand quickly back and forth across his heart. Upendra also massaged his heart while I sat holding his lotus feet. For 4 hours, Prabhupada was very peaceful. At 7:25 p.m., Prabhupada opened his eyes, which were very clear, more so than they had been in many months. His mouth opened, his tongue moved, and then he became still. The Kaviraj took Prabhupada's pulse and held a cotton swab to his nostril, detecting no movement of air. Our beloved Srila Prabhupada had departed. Surrounded by his loving disciples who were chanting the holy name of Krishna, lying very peaceful in his bed in Vrindavan Dham, the holy land of Krishna's birth, his head directed towards the deities of Krishna Balaram, surrounded by photos of all the deities and his Guru Maharaj, decorated with chandan and a big tulsi leaf on his forehead, and holding tulsi in his right hand, he departed and returned to the lotus feet of Krishna from whence he came. Oh, how the world has become devoid of its crest jewel, Srila Prabhupada. Oh, how everything is now vacant, the room filled with wailing and crying. Devotees clutched Prabhupada's lotus feet, and Pishima, Srila Prabhupada's sister, approached, crying piteously. The day was Gaur Chaturthi Tithi, the 4th day of the light half of the month of Kartik. The time was 7:25 p.m., 5 minutes after the most auspicious time of the day, Amrita Yoga began. His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for sharing this immense love. And well, we all know it's nectar, but at the same time, a very bitter pill to swallow. But it is the reality of life. And devotees, please, if anyone may have questions, comments, realizations, reflections you may want to share or ask, please indicate by using the hand emoji or your physical hand, and you'll be asked to unmute to speak or to share your reflections. Okay, Gail, please give me unmute. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Venkata.
Hare Krishna, it's wonderful to hear your voice.
I was so excited, of course, when I realized that you're going to be speaking today. And I'm so happy that my usual conflict was not there with Krishna's arrangement. Okay, so yeah, I have a couple of, I don't know, reflections, a couple of questions also.
Please.
Yeah, well, one reflection was that, when you're saying that the separation or the disappearance of the spiritual master, doesn't mean the end of a relationship or that the relationship necessarily declines. And I was, whenever I hear that subject, I immediately think of, people like Niranjan Swami, or, we can think of so many others who had like such limited contact with Srila Prabhupada. I think he could count on like one hand how many times he actually saw him in person, and maybe even less spoke to him, yet his his closeness to Srila Prabhupada is like so inspiring, especially considering his contact with Srila Prabhupada was that limited. So just to substantiate that point that you were making, you know.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing was, you know, I think it was Srila Prabhupada, right, who said that we should cry for the departure of the spiritual master. So when you were making that point, or when Srila Prabhupada was making that point, I was thinking, you know, that I'm sure it does not mean that we should cry artificially, you know, that, you know, if we shouldn't kind of like try to drum up sentiments that aren't there. So
Right.
I'm thinking that what that instruction meant was that we shouldn't feel like we should suppress any emotions that are legitimately there as being something material, you know? And yeah, something like that. So I was just, you know, yeah, so you're saying right. So I was actually asking for confirmation about what I was thinking.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So I understand that in a similar way. And I think especially in the context of sometimes both historically as far as the movement, but also as individuals, sometimes we can, in a very immature way, approach or we can take these kinds of instructions, right? Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the wise lament for neither the living nor the dead. One should not mourn for that which is not right. So we can, I think, sometimes, both as individuals, but as we've seen, even as a movement, we can sometimes have a very harsh approach, and you know, to mourning or grieving, even to the point of saying, well, you know, like it's just the body and the soul's eternal, and you know, and then in the case of the spiritual master, he lives, you know, forever in his instructions, and Vani is there, and therefore, you know, suppress or even be dismissive of that emotion. So yeah, that's so kind of confirming what you're saying. I read that Srila Prabhupada's instruction that one should cry in this way of one should not suppress the emotion, one should not try to jump over the emotion or artificially, you know, deny that aspect. But that it actually, there is sadness, and one should feel that, and one should grieve. And even, you know, I always love the example of in the Mahabharata, after Krishna has already spoken the whole Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, you still see Arjuna when Abhimanyu is killed. Arjuna and all the Pandavas, they weep, and actually Krishna weeps with them, according to the Mahabharata. So I take it in that spirit.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because in on that very subject of, you know, Krishna, of Arjuna weeping for the departure of his son. What was again Krishna's response to that? You know, for all of us who think that crying over the departure of our loved ones is like sentimental and being on a bodily platform, how would Krishna answer that?
Yeah, he cried with him. He fully accepted that, you know, that grief and cried with Arjun, and also comforted him, and also encouraged him to continue with his dharma, right? So all these things have to coexist. If in the case, coming back to Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, or the disappearance of the spiritual master more generally, we should cry if we're feeling that emotion. We shouldn't, as you said, I agree with you that I don't take this to mean we should artificially force ourselves to cry or something if we're not feeling, we're not naturally, you know, we're all individuals. If we're not naturally feeling those particular sentiments or those emotions, especially manifested in a way of crying, that's okay as well. So we shouldn't, as you said, drum it up, but nor should we suppress it. At the same time, if we are so overwhelmed with grief that we just can't do anything else. And then we sort of start spiraling into some kind of despair. That's also not, fulfilling what Srila Prabhupada is instructing here, or even, right, that's not in alignment with his own desires for how we should honor his teachings. So both need to be there. There needs to be that natural grieving, that natural mourning, that natural allowing us to feel whatever we're feeling, and then also the philosophical perspective that allows us to go on, especially following the instructions of the spiritual master. Is that okay?
Well, just one last thing. This is like a good segue into my last question, which is, I think I need, because we hear about this term spiritual bypassing more and more and more every day recently. And so I think I just need a little more clarity about what this term means. Like in this context, right? So spiritual bypassing, would that be my not, let's say, crying for a dear departed one because only on a theoretical level I know that they're not the body and that they haven't really died? Is that what spiritual bypassing is? To like respond in an artificial way based on only theoretical understanding, or is it something else? I don't know.
I think that's a part of it. I'm not so knowledgeable about it. From what I understand, the term kind of comes from one Buddhist teacher. So we're sort of, it's become more popular. We're kind of adopting it to different contexts. I think for us, I think that is one way we can understand spiritual bypassing. In other words, I am not quite there in terms of realization, but I just sort of parrot the words.
By the way.
Say it again. I'm sorry, say it again.
I said, you're the one who reminded me of it. I don't remember the context exactly of how you brought it up, that term, but you reminded me.
Okay. Yeah, for better and for worse, I don't know. But yeah, I think one way to understand spiritual bypass is like, I'm not really there in terms of realization, or maybe even in terms of like deep understanding, but I kind of know the right things to say, right? You see this with children also sometimes, or with youth, where they can parrot and say the right answer, like, oh, we're not these bodies, but it's not really coming from a place of that I genuinely feel that, or even that I'm like trying to more deeply understand that. It's just like a way of running away from the feelings that I'm feeling, right? So I think there's an aspect. What makes it spiritual bypassing is I think there's an aspect of avoidance or escapism that is not really rooted in spiritual wisdom, but that is rooted in discomfort with, sort of strong feelings. So it's like, ooh, like for some of us, right, to allow ourselves to experience sadness, or discomfort, or feeling of helplessness, or whatever the things we naturally feel when a loved one leaves us, especially when a teacher, a guide leaves us, that those can be some very scary feelings. Those can bring up some very negative emotions. And so the spiritual bypass piece, I think, comes in if we're from a place of fear, from a place of avoidance, from a place of wanting to escape the discomfort of sitting with those feelings or facing those feelings. So we try to spiritualize it by saying, oh, that's okay, because, they live forever in their instructions, and, everything's fine because their Vani is still there and not Bapam. So I think that's one, for me. I don't know if that's really spiritual bypass, but that's one way I use that term, spiritual bypass. I think a second way we can relate it, but a second way we can use it is when it comes to another devotee, right? So I come to you, Gail, and I'm really upset and I'm feeling really sad. My spiritual master has just departed, and I'm feeling all these things, and it's a very tender time for me, and I don't know what to do with all these feelings. I come to you, and not that you would actually do this, but just in the example, and you say, well, you know, it's okay. Your spiritual master is still with you through his instructions, and you know, he is eternal, and it's just like the, you know, the rising and setting of the sun. So dry your tears, and you know, he would want you to go on with their service. You're saying all the things you're saying are philosophically true, right? And in fact, many of them are things that I tried to talk about, you know, in this Bhagavatam class. But if right now in that moment, if what my heart right now is not ready to necessarily hear and process those things, so it can be a form of spiritual bypass, because again, you know, maybe you're just uncomfortable with the sort of the very human, messy emotions that are coming up. So it's a way of avoiding that by just jumping straight into the philosophy. Not to confuse things more, but I'm going to quote from another tradition now. There's a saying within Judaism, within the Jewish tradition, that says that one should not speak philosophy while the body is still in the room.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, in those very tender moments, that's not the time to jump into, you know, the tattva of, you know, the soul, the body, the philosophy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but unless it can really be in a place that's reassuring and comforting, that's not the time to jump into philosophy, right? There's a time for everything. There's a time, as Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and you know, you can see the recording of this, but as Tamal Krishna Maharaj recounts, right, that was a time for saying, oh, you know, to lament and to call out and to weep and, you know, all of that. Is that all right?
That was beautiful. So basically, whether you're dealing with yourself or with somebody else, the idea is that, you know, we shouldn't spiritually bypass by denying either our feelings or somebody else's feelings through the vehicle of the philosophy.
Yeah, okay. I think so.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. So we've got to His Grace.
Thank you, so
please give me a mute. Thank you, Ms. Gail.
Hare Krishna, please accept humble obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Wonderful sharing. I have a question, and it's a little bit, still about Srila Prabhupada, but in another mood. Srila Prabhupada, in his preface to the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, he concluded that preface by quoting SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, First Canto, chapter 5, text 11. You know that popular verse, Tad Vagvisar Gojana, Taga Viplavo, etc. So, on the other hand, that literature which is full with descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, and pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a transcendental creation meant to bring about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization. So Srila Prabhupada used this to conclude his preface. And before that, he said, I must admit my frailties in presenting SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, but still I am hopeful of its good reception by the thinkers and leaders of society on the strength of this following statement in the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. So yes. I'm using this Prabhupada's conclusion of his preface on SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM and of his, let's say, of his literary work, what he gave to the West. Because I believe that Srila Prabhupada had a vision, and that vision is to bring about a revolution, just what this verse says. To bring about a revolution in the misdirected civilization of the modern world. And how to do that, Srila Prabhupada started giving us the holy name, give us, the Ashana process. And then he said, the other part of my mission is 50% that remains is Vanashram. And I believe strongly that that vision of bringing about a misdirected, or a revolution in the misdirected civilization cannot be realized if that 50%, that other part of his vision is not accomplished. I strongly believe that he meant it, he saw it, and he quoted Bhagavatam to justify that all this that I'm giving you, the goal is to bring about a revolution in the misdirected civilization. So I think that we become complacent, enjoying and feeling satisfied or contented with just what we have. And we're not seeing this other aspect of what Prabhupada had envisioned. So, in your capacity as a university chaplain and so on, and knowing what it means to bring about a revolution in the misdirected civilization, do you really think that we, ISKCON today, we are equipped for that, or do we even have it in our agenda? It's like we are gradually pushing that aside, and it's like it is not we Prabhupada Nugas that are going to make that happen. That's how it looks to me. So what do you think? Thank you.
Yeah, wow. Putting me on the spot a little bit. So let me say, first of all, it's really interesting that you bring up the which Srila Prabhupada said 50% of the work. And in many of these remembrances of Srila Prabhupada's final days, I'm sorry, there's a little disturbance. I'm having a hard time hearing. In many of these remembrances of Srila Prabhupada's final days, there are some statements like that. Interestingly, sometimes Prabhupada would say 50%. Sometimes when devotees would ask, Prabhupada would say something a little bit different. But regardless, I do think that yes, Srila Prabhupada was pointing us towards the importance of varnashram, and to the point of the verse that you quoted and the purport that creating a revolution, specifically a revolution in consciousness. So there are maybe political dimensions to that revolution. There are economic dimensions to that revolution. There are practical concerns. But first and foremost, my understanding is Srila Prabhupada's approach was, if we address it on the consciousness level, then everything flows from that. Do I think that we need to make that a priority? I do. And at the same time, I want to respectfully, not push back, but I want to respectfully also share that is going to look different for different people. And I think one of the things, at least in my own, this is my own opinion, but looking at over the different attempts that have been made over many years, I think one of the things that has been a little bit of a one of the things that I think we've struggled with is sometimes there's a tendency to think that varnashram means this one thing, and varnashram it has many layers to it. It has many aspects to it, and so one of the things that I would love to see is if we can have an approach to varnashram that allows for many different visions, not just one particular very narrow definition of this is what varnashram is. Varnashram means this particular thing. There's a component to it that definitely calls for a very kind of radical reorientation to our relationship with nature, our relationship with the land, to farming, to agriculture. That's one aspect of it. There's another aspect of it, right? We often focus on the Varna part, but there's also the aspect of really, have we kind of dived deep into really creating healthy ashramas, really creating healthy, functional, sustainable models of what it means for each of the ashramas. That's been something that personally, I think we've really been neglectful of. So anyway, I don't want to necessarily get sidetracked and get into specifics, but I think yes, I agree in general with the idea that we do have work to do as far as this, 50% Varnashram kind of broad-based what we as a movement can and should be doing as far as spearheading this kind of revolution in consciousness. And I think we need to look at that in many different ways, innovatively, creatively. And it's not just one sort of stereotype notion of what Varnashram is. I hope that's okay. It's a vast topic, and I think there's a lot of room for conversation and maybe even agreement and disagreement there.
Thank you very much. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Acharya Prabhu. Anyone else with something to ask or share? I think this topic of Varnashram Dharma or Varnashram system requires special occasion, because it's like Prabhuji was saying, it's very fully loaded. But Prabhuji, if I may ask this question, because we are all in devotional service. We're trying to perform devotional service, and we understand that the fundamentals and the basis of spiritual life is that we are not the body. We are spirit souls.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the lives of devotees, do we in the first place live as humans who are on the path of becoming spiritual, or we are spirits and our nature is spiritual, encased in this material human body? These two views, I will leave it with you, because if I see myself as I'm a human being and I'm practicing these disciplines given to us by Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada, of course from the scriptures, and he's tailored the practices for our benefit to use.
Mm-hmm.
And by practicing this system, I will become spiritual, or I will realize myself as spiritual. Or I say that I am by nature spirit, and I'm now finding myself in this human body, and therefore I'm going to behave in my original self, being spirit. Which way do we try to live our lives as devotees?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a great question. So I want to try to answer that question in two ways. First, I want to try to answer sort of from maybe more of a philosophical approach or standpoint. And then the second is maybe a little bit more practical or pragmatic, if that's okay. This is just what's coming to my mind right now. So first, philosophically, I think it's a very deep topic. There's also, it gets very technical in terms of, and there's some disagreement, or maybe disagreement is not the right word, but there's some difference of emphasis even within our tradition as to what is intrinsic, what is inherited, right? If you're familiar with like some of these different ways that our acharyas speak about this. But I would say my understanding philosophically is in our tradition, particularly coming from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, from Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, and from our our gurus, you know, who are coming in that line, the imagery or analogy that's often given is of reawakening. And so I think in that sense, it's probably, to me, it's a little bit more the second of the two kind of models that you gave, where Srila Prabhupada, for instance, would often emphasize that right, Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition. Krishna consciousness, right? Bhakti, or even just more generally speaking, like the nature of the self, the Atma, the soul, if you want to call it the spirit soul, that is not something extrinsic. That's not something that's outside of ourselves that we need to be taught or given, but it's something within ourselves that we've forgotten. So there's a so the imagery, the analogy that's often given is of like reawakening, right? Reawakening our dormant, Srila Prabhupada would call it our dormant Krishna consciousness. So we are originally spiritual entities that have forgotten temporarily, although for us it feels like it's been forever, but it's, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's a very temporary kind of misidentification with the body and mind, but actually our nature is spiritual. And so in that sense, it feels like it's a little bit more like that second paradigm of that I am a spiritual being that is temporarily, you know, finds myself in this very uncomfortable position of being embodied or caged into a body. Another way that's sometimes explained or articulated is that like imagine that we are we find ourselves in like a hospital bed with an illness, and we become so used to the illness that we start thinking that, oh, this illness is who I am, but I'm actually not that illness. I'm a healthy person that is temporarily, right, I have this temporary condition. There's a very famous example or analogy given of the holy name. This is specifically for the holy name, that the holy name is like rock candy or sugar candy. I don't know if you've had this experience. If everyone knows, in Hindi we call it mishri. Mishri is like, it's basically crystallized, you know, sort of sugar, like in these like kind of rocks that it's like pure sugar basically. But when you have jaundice, everything you taste tastes bitter, and so when you eat that sugar rock candy, and it tastes bitter. But the more that you eat it, the more you become free of this bitter taste, and you can start to appreciate the sweetness again. So this is specifically given for the holy name. But the idea is that right now we are in this artificial condition of being sick, having an illness, and therefore when we engage in some spiritual practice like chanting the holy name, it feels very weird to us. It feels very we don't have the taste. It feels very mechanical and artificial and unusual to us. But actually, if we just keep with the practice, we'll realize that no, this is actually who I am more naturally, and it's the other stuff, it's the materialism that is unnatural. So that's my philosophical answer. My practical answer, though, is both sides of that give us some insight into truth, and that based on where we're at, we may need to be reminded of one lesson rather than the other. We may need to be more reminded. We need to be reminded of both. And here's what I mean by that. If our approach to spiritual life, as often happens with some devotees, if our approach to spiritual life is one that is very like hardcore body denying, right? There's some devotees, or sometimes even in our lives, where we feel very drawn to this like negation of the body, negation of the world. Then for our own growth, we may need to remind ourselves a little bit more of that first paradigm, that, okay, yes, ultimately I am, my true identity is as eternal servant of Krishna, Nityara Krishna Das. My my actual identity is I'm pure spirit soul. I'm not this body. But also I need to remind myself that I'm in a body. So I need to, right? So just as an example, if in the name of spirituality, again, going back to kind of Gail's point as well, or Gail's question, if in the name of spirituality, I find myself being very neglectful of my own, bodily health, and maybe even like the bodily health of others, then maybe I've gone a little too far, and I'm over spiritualizing, and therefore I'm being neglectful of something that is also connected to Krishna, that is also a gift from Krishna. So I need to correct that by maybe reminding myself that, okay, I'm not this body, but I have a body. The body comes from Krishna, it's a gift from Krishna, therefore I need to take care of it. These other devotees, they're also not these bodies, but their bodies are also spiritualized. They're also temples of the Krishna, that spark of Krishna that's within them. So I should also be respectful and honor those bodies, right? So do you see what I'm saying? Like, if that's my tendency, if my tendency is to deny the body, then I should balance out by reminding myself of the importance or significance of the body as well, connected to Krishna. If my tendency is to be a little bit more on that bodily platform, and if my growing edge is that I'm maybe a little too much there, and I'm maybe even using that as an excuse, okay, then maybe for me, I need to remind myself, I need to move from there and remind myself that, yeah, ultimately I should remember that first and foremost, I'm a spiritual being, and then the embodied part comes. So practically, the philosophy is the same, but practically, when to lean into it, when to lean away from it, when to stress this, when to stress that I think we need to, under guidance, develop some self-awareness, self-honesty about.
Well,
I hope that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the answers, both from the philosophical viewpoint. But the reason I asked this question is because I was very new, I say fairly new in devotional service. And at the time, I knew the position of the spiritual master to be not ordinary, as I still do, that the position of the spiritual master is not ordinary. And then there was an interfaith program held by the ISKCON devotees. And my master was speaking, His Holiness Bhaktivinoda Swami Maharaj. And the host, who happened to be friends with my Gurudev, said, this person is very spiritual. He has no anger in him. So I picked that. So all along, my understanding of my Gurudev being the spiritual master is that he has no anger. And then one day, I saw the anger of my Gurudev. I have no words to describe the anger. And then I started asking myself, what? I learned that this is spiritual master. He's so pure, he has no anger in him. Now he has this anger in him. So is he really a spiritual master? I was thinking like this. Now we tell people that when someone is a spiritual master guru, he is beyond the bodily demands. And therefore, he does not go through any pain, any suffering, nothing. Now, if we spoke like this to someone, and this individual finds, like Sri Prabhupada, his passing, which I do not like to talk about, but we all see what Sri Prabhupada went through.
Yes.
I did not see it with my gross physical eyes. The videos are there. But I saw with my own eyes how my Gurudev left his body in Giranagri.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I do not understand that this is a spiritual being in a material body, and these are the characteristics of material body.
Mm.
We read from the scriptures, and there are 6 stages of the material body, some transformations. The spirit soul, the spiritual body does not go through these transformations. The material body goes through these transformations. So
Yes.
I do not understand why some devotees try to brush off the reality of a spiritual master, completely pure, but being in this material world and having this material body with blood, would not have to go through situations that ordinary human beings go through. The way they accept or experience the reality may be different.
Yes.
Me being a conditioned soul, but to completely deny that the spiritual master does not go through any of such changes, how well are we going to be able to preach to people that, I don't know, because I'm a little crazy here, because we studied the Srimad Bhagavatam in a chronological manner, and we just studied how Krishna made or designed his own family, the Yadavas, to lead the planet in such a very grotesque manner. Like initially, we're talking about how some, like the way Prabhupada left his body in Vrindavan, some gurus are not leaving their bodies in Vrindavan. It does not mean that they are not gurus. Some have diseases, prolonged diseases. It does not mean that they are not gurus. Some may be involved in auto accident, plane crash, whatever. It does not mean that they are not gurus. But the way we speak, if we are not careful, I believe, we're going to discourage lots of people accepting philosophy that these people are spiritual masters, they are gurus, they are pure, but they are going to go through these material changes, transformations. And I do not know if you have something to say about it, but I'm very, very much disturbed when I hear devotees say that because someone is a pure devotee, he's become a robot, that he has no emotions, he has no feelings.
Right.
It beats my mind, and I'll just be beating around the bush, but I would like to end here.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you for clarifying that, and I better understand sort of where your question is coming from. Yeah, I think you raise really, really important points. Sometimes I think we have a tendency also to look at things in very linear and very literal terms, right? So when that person made that statement about your spiritual master, that, oh, I see, this is not an ordinary person, he doesn't have anger. Was that true? That was true. That was true in terms of as a glorification. That's true. That's true also in the sense of, if we look at it as this person doesn't have anger in the sense of this person is not overwhelmed by their anger and swayed by their anger in the way that I often am, in the way that most of us are, in the way that, that their anger is connected to, ego and the fulfillment of their own desires. Um, in all of those ways, that person's glorification was quite accurate. And at the same time, as you personally experienced, does that mean that your spiritual master was like, an emotionless robot that went through, every single experience in exactly the same way with exactly the same neutral? Not at all, right? That there's a fullness of emotions, but that my understanding is that in each of those states of emotion, there was that sincere alignment with Krishna's will, that sincere surrender, that whether in a time of happiness and joy where the emotions being expressed are maybe more, excitement and what we would consider positive emotions, or in times of anxiety, times that are anger inducing. In either of those cases, and in all cases, there's a genuine, sincere alignment with Krishna's will. Um, that that is a way that these great souls, I think, model for us what it means to have what it means to be fully human and to be completely spiritualized or completely on the spiritual platform or Krishna conscious, to use a very um, to to put it most accurately, right? What we talk about so much about Krishna conscious. What does it mean to be Krishna conscious? Does it mean that we don't experience this fullness of emotions? No, it means that in all of those situations, still the consciousness comes back to Krishna. Still, there's an alignment with Krishna. Still, at the end of the day, it's about serving Krishna. It's about connecting Krishna. It's about remembering Krishna and never forgetting him. And your spiritual master and all of our gurus are such beautiful examples of that. So thank you for sharing that. I'm also reminded of this beautiful, very instructive pastime, which unfortunately I know we're already it's already so late, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But there's this beautiful pastime that I would encourage everyone to familiarize yourselves with, of the spiritual master and grand spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya himself. So Lord Chaitanya being Krishna himself, but still teaching by his example, taking a spiritual master whose name was Ishvara Puri. And Ishvara Puri was himself a disciple of a great soul, Madhavendra Puri. When Madhavendra Puri was leaving this world, and again, setting that example, showing by his example how a great soul leaves this world. When he was leaving this world, what was Ishvara Puri doing? Ishvara Puri was caring for his most, you can say, most humble and most basic human needs. Actually, it's described, it sounds a little bit maybe, even crass to say, but just to make this point, it's even explained that Ishvara Puri, among his services, although he was a great scholar, he was such a realized devotee, he was so can you imagine to be awarded the role of the spiritual master of Krishna himself appearing as a devotee? What was the exalted nature of Ishvara Puri? But Ishvara Puri, among other services, he was cleaning the bodily. He was cleaning the body of his spiritual master of Madhavendra Puri. He was cleaning the stool and urine of Madhavendra Puri. And if anyone has had any experience of offering like palliative care, it's very physically demanding, and it's also very physically right. It's not, as we say, it's not a pretty sight. There's a kind of a literal and figurative messiness to it. That's what Ishvara Puri was doing for Madhavendra Puri. It's written in our Shastra. It's written in our sacred texts. Why would the authors of these texts write something so physical, so bodily, as that he was cleaning the stool and urine, right? I think part of it is to remind us that no, this is what it means. Even for our great spiritual masters, they're also still teaching us what it means to be fully human, and what it means to have those physical, mental, and emotional needs, and what it means to care for those great souls who who get to experience that very difficult service of serving the spiritual master, particularly at that stage of their lives, or in that, in those episodes of their lives, what it means to serve not just to serve them in a spiritual sense, but what it means to understand and serve their human side. And one of the things one of the reasons I'm so drawn to that story is there's a godbrother of Ishwarapuri who's also described, and he is the example of what not to do. He is so spiritually learned. He was actually a great scholar of Vedanta, but in the final days of their guru, of Madhavendra Puri, this other disciple, whose name is Ramachandra Puri, he couldn't understand. He was actually bewildered by, and he couldn't understand the actual physical, emotional, and even spiritual needs and realizations of their spiritual master. And so, speaking of spiritual bypassing, going back to the other question, he very foolishly tried to speak some words of Vedanta philosophy, especially impersonal Vedanta philosophy, to his spiritual master. And he was actually rebuked and kind of condemned by his spiritual master. It's very heavy. And history proved he went on to become kind of an offender, and such that he was such an offender that he couldn't even understand Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's nature or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, and he dared to criticize and judge Mahaprabhu. So it's a very, very instructive matter for us that our mood should be like Madhavendra Puri, or rather, I'm sorry, our mood should be like Ishwara Puri was towards his guru Madhavendra, that we should appreciate not just the theoretical highest spiritual teachings, but we should appreciate and understand and even serve our spiritual masters in their fullness as embodied human beings. I hope that's okay.
Yeah,
I know
yes.
we're going quite long now, so
Yeah, I think you are, because just like you were saying, we see vivid examples that if we try to be honest to ourselves, we will try to emulate such examples. That is the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. Srivas was so renowned, even though he was a Grihastha. He was so renowned, he wasn't like really coming forth with his household responsibilities. But Lord Chaitanya scolded him and told him that you need to take care of the family. Sanatana Goswami, we all know, such an eternal associate of the Lord. But he was having physical, bodily challenges. He was suffering from eczema. So much to the point that he pretended as if this body, Lord Chaitanya wants to hug me in this body. This body is not fit for the Lord to behold. Therefore, I'm going to come. And Lord Chaitanya scolded him too, that your body is mine, it's not yours. So yes. my understanding is that what we call spiritual, not spiritual, is basically using whatever in the service of Krishna. Whatever we use in the service of Krishna is spiritual. And as long as we are in this material body, we are in this material world, we're going to be using material things. And so using those material things or these material bodies to serve Krishna, it becomes spiritual. Therefore, my spiritual master, using his anger to serve Krishna, is spiritual. Hanuman, using his anger to serve Lord Ram, is spiritual. Using my emotions to cry for the Lord is spiritual. And so I do not, well, there is one, Shumara Prabhu has his hand up, but there is one comment in the chat room I would like to read, and then we'll go to His Grace Shriman Varahacharya Prabhu. It says, compassion and empathy are the words needed. This is from Mitra Vinda. Compassion and empathy are the words needed. Somehow, even though our Lord Chaitanya is the embodiment of these words, we find it difficult to access them for ourselves and others in times of need, such as separation. We should focus on being more personal, as Srila Prabhupada, personal as Srila Prabhupada was, and not lean so heavily on projecting knowledge instead of love as the essence of our practice. This is from Mitra. I think it's more of a comment and observation she is sharing. So I don't know if you want to say something in regards to what she just said. And then
it's a beautiful idea. I don't have anything to add. I also do probably want to be a little conscious of the time, because unfortunately, I also do have another commitment at 12. So,
well, all right. So we will take these two hands. I hope you have very short, brief questions, and then Prabhuji, we can't thank you enough for spending all these hours with us. Shrimara Prabhu, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna. Well, my question is brief. It's in line. Actually, I had the question in my mind, and then Saradi Prabhu just asked the same question. And in your comments also, some other things came up. Well, anyway, in brief, I mean, like the example you gave of Ishwara Puri and Lochinta Madhavendra Puri, and Ramachandra Puri was actually speaking like an impersonalist. And that is the question I want to ask. We found that gurus in the impersonal groups seem to teach another lesson of the way to leave this body. Why is that? I mean, like Paramahansa Yogananda, the way he left his body, and many others, you know. It's totally different from the way many Vaishnavas live their body. But these are impersonalists. I mean, they're not really like Vaishnavas. But then the way they live the body is totally different. And it's like most of the time, you know, like they just walk into the room, okay, I'm about to leave. And that's it, they're gone. We have many examples of such, but most of them are impersonally. But the examples from the Vaishnava community is different. And that's why Ramachandra Puri example is very pertinent, because he was also leaning towards impersonalism while he was criticizing Madhavendra Puri. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things going on there, but one thing that I'm struck by is that we have a tendency to judge, and we judge very externally, but these are very subtle matters. It's whether someone is, you know, I can't comment so much on you know, different impersonal teachers. No doubt many were very great souls who had perhaps even achieved some levels of siddhis and realizations where they could depart in such ways. One of the things that I really take away from that story, though, of Ramachandra Puri criticizing, is that he judged very externally, and perhaps colored by this impersonal philosophy, he couldn't understand that something deeper was going on a deeper level. And so a very practical takeaway for us is, again, let's be very, very careful about judging superficially, judging externally. We have our expectations of what, you know, either our passing or the departure of a great soul should look like. But that's also very superficial and very based on our own external understanding. And when we do that, we don't leave room for Krishna to to connect with that person in whatever way he wants to connect. So it's explained when Ramachandra Puri does this, not only is he influenced by impersonal understanding, but he thinks he's doing something good. He actually, right, his intention is that he's trying to console his guru, but that's not what his guru wants or needs in that moment. So to me, just a very practical takeaway is that we should be very careful about judging externally and having those kinds of expectations, and we should have the humility to understand that there's a subtlety at work, that Krishna is present. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have one quick question, if that's possible. Otherwise,
can you make it really quick and brief, please?
Yes. This is
Okay,
a real quick question. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for your presentation. I just like you to comment on Bhismadev's passing away. Before Bhisma finally left his body, Arjuna set him an bed of arrows. And Bhisma was having a physical body, eating, drinking, everything like I do. But when he was about to die, the way that he passed through and finally left his body, if he was in material consciousness, I don't think he can be on that arrows of bed. And again, even ask Arjuna to give him a pillow. And Arjuna had to set another arrow for him to put his head on. And physically, if you look at Bhismadev, one may say that he was not feeling any pain. Because if someone is feeling pain on that arrows, his expressions will show that he is actually in pain. But Bhisma was just careless about, the arrows and whatever he was lying on. How do you comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the principle is the same, right? That Bhishma, a Mahajan, great devotee, went through so many different situations in life, different reversals. But the principle is that he was completely surrendered. In Bhishma's particular case, my understanding is Bhishma, especially being a Kshatriya, of course, his way of the way that his surrender manifested may have been that he was actually able to withstand and transcend, even on the physical level, that physical pain. That doesn't necessarily mean, as Sahadev Prabhu, I think made this beautiful point, that doesn't necessarily mean that, therefore all Vaishnavas, unless they're completely free of the physical pain, then they're not real gurus, they're not real. It's that for Bhishma, that especially as a Kshatriya, maybe that was the way that we glorify Bhishma, as being sort of transcendent to the pain. But the principle is the same for Srila Prabhupada, for our different gurus that are teaching us through their example how to have a glorious departure. They're also transcending that pain, whether it's transcending that pain in a physical sense that we can appreciate with our physical eyes or ears, or that we can see and hear for ourselves, or whether it's more internally, that they may externally be seeming to go through some things. Like I was reading earlier that Prabhupada was experiencing some spasms, and like the caretakers were calling them attacks, heart attacks actually, and loss of breathing and things like that. Okay, those physical symptoms were there, but on the level of consciousness, on the more subtle and even entirely spiritual level, Prabhupada was same principle. He was just in that same way, experiencing what Bhishma experienced. And I also love that you brought up the example of Bhishma, because actually the last drama that Srila Prabhupada saw was this passing away of Bhishma, and Prabhupada so much appreciated And he actually analogized himself to this drama. I believe this was in London. And he spoke about Bhishma's glorious passing, and he said that this is how I also want to pass. So I'll just read this very briefly, and we can close on this. He said, there are some instructions. He says, Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked him, Srila Prabhupada, what are you thinking? Prabhupada replied, that my death may be equally glorious. I want to die like Bhishma. Even if I become unconscious, do not put me in a hospital to die. Bhishma was pleased with the arrows which did the worst harm. Bhishma was pleased that the arrows which did the worst harm were Arjuna's. All of you, please give me the benediction to die a glorious death in the presence of devotees in the holy name of Krishna. There are some instructions that only death can give. To cushion Bhishma's head, they brought silk pillows, but he rejected them. Only Arjuna could understand Bhishma's mind, so he at once shot 3 arrows, and their feathery ends formed a suitable pillow. And no one could find a drink to quench Bhishma's thirst, so Arjuna invoked a mantra that he alone knew and brought the sacred Ganga from the ground. These are my final days. Be attentive to me like Arjuna and make it possible for me to remember Krishna until the very end. Now let me take some rest. So again, Jagat Guru, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Tirupava Mahotsav Ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Thank you all so much. I apologize for going so far over time. We've solidly been speaking
Prabhu,
for 2 hours.
We haven't gone over time. We apologize to you for taking so much of your time because you have another engagement. And dear devotees, because Prabhuji has to leave, I wanted to quickly say this because it will be an embarrassment for Prabhuji to listen to what I have to say, because the devotees are a bit contrary to Shri Krishna in the sense that Krishna wants to be glorified, his devotees do not want to hear being glorified. But our revered speaker for today is a beloved disciple of His Holiness Sri Radhanath Swami Maharaj, and he is also a chaplain of Princeton University, the same university our Gurudev His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj attended. And Prabhuji has been so wonderful. He's been engaged in some programs for Gurudev in the university a couple times and other programs also. Because Prabhuji has to leave, I'm going to be very brief. But if you want to hear more from Prabhuji, I suggest and recommend that you tune in to Namra's podcast. If you tune into Namra's podcast, you'll get to hear more from him. And we also humbly request that Prabhuji, at least once in a month, you give us your association. Here, we do this Monday through Friday, every day. So with that being said, dear devotees, we're going to humbly request you all to kindly unmute, and we all complete our ritual by chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to express our appreciation to our speaker, His Grace VENKATA Prabhu Jai. Hare
Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Karpataru Ubhyascha Kripa Sindhyascha Patitanam Pavashvebhyo His Grace Venkata Prabhu Ki Jai. Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj Ki Jai. His confounder Acharya, His Divine Grace Laisi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.